I'd like to introduce Brian Gustafson. Since moving to Golden, he has imparted so much interesting information and interesting wildlife wisdom to me, and I'm really pleased that he agreed to be our first speaker of the series. From birds to bighorn sheep to mountain goats to elk, he has a wealth of information from living and adventuring and working his whole life here in Golden. So without further ado, please welcome Brian Gustafson.
Okay, great turnout. Great to see everybody out here and the interest, obviously, in wildlife and wild spaces. I'm going to go through. I got to make sure I see how to run this thing again. A bunch of different elements. Everybody hear me in the back? Okay. Sadie, you got me back there. Cool. So obviously, I'm going to talk about who I am first and why I think I should be up here and talking about elk a little bit. What makes an elk, we'll touch on that briefly. Talk about some of the impacts to elk ecology, the way they use their habitats and their populations. Talk about what we know about elk in this part of the world and what we don't know. That's kind of the bigger part of it. I will conclude a little bit with, I guess, what we're doing more regionally and locally to support a future for elk in this area. So who is this guy? Like, he kind of does a little bit of things around here. I was born in Golden, grew up in Golden, left a few times to go to school. Recently I got caught the running bug, so long distance running is kind of in my thing, but I grew up my teenage years riding bikes and kayaking in whitewater. But one of the things that's always been in my life is wildlife, fish, being outside. My dad moved here. My parents moved here in the early '80s for forestry work. So that's really what brought my family here. And this is me fishing with my grandpa and my dad, and this is me as a kid with elk hunting with my dad as like when I could barely walk, right? So I get out, I see a lot, and I've really through my lifetime living here been able to really witness a lot of change over the years, change in habitats, change in populations, and change in land use. So hopefully that gives me a little bit of the street cred, I guess, to be able to stand up here and talk about these kind of things. My education's at the master's level. I did my master's looking at nesting birds, actually. Funny I'm talking about elk, but my master's was in nesting birds. So outside of that, I do a lot of other work around here. My main work, I work with the Golden District Rod and Gun Club for doing a lot of habitat and wildlife projects for them. And I'm an independent ecological consultant, so we have a few people working for us and doing work not only locally but regionally as well. I sit on the Regional Wildlife and Habitat Advisory Committee, a new committee formed under the Together for Wildlife strategy. So we get to kind of meet with a bunch of other wildlife-based people to help advise wildlife management in the region. Pretty great table to be around. What else? I guess I sit on a few other boards and advisory committees anyways, which is short for, in short, I'm passionate about what I'm doing and I'm involved in every way that I possibly can be. So the start of the show, there's a little close-up look at Cervus canadensis here, the Rocky Mountain elk. So bulls and cows, the men and the women of the elk family here were a little bit different in the way they look, the way they act. Bulls got these big antlers as they grow. they're definitely bigger than the cows, and you know, at certain times of the year, they definitely have a little bit of a different color to them as well. So for the most part, elk are traditionally a seasonally migrating species, which means they spend a lot of their, you know, summertime in the alpine, and winter in lower elevations where the snow levels aren't so restrictive of their feeding needs. We also have resident elk that just stay in the bottom of the valley year round. So the little guys range from about 35 pounds to about 700 pounds for a big adult male. We were able to capture this picture a few months ago, or actually just a month ago, on one of our cameras on one of our projects. So this is these are two bulls, and this is just a few days apart where they've actually lost their antlers. So they this was, I think the first picture was April 10th, and then this picture was April 16th. So pretty neat to catch that change, and they'll pretty much immediately start regrowing those horns through the summer with their velvet on them, and then they tend to shed their velvet in September. So breeding season is kind of a really, I'll get to that next slide there, really interesting time for elk. And this is when we really get the big characteristics of elk that, you know, it's really exciting to hunt elk at this time of year, because they're so, I don't know, they're very gregarious, they're loud, they're doing a lot of wild things around their breeding. You know, you get their big loud bugles, and they're marking territories, they're rolling in wallow pits. It's pretty incredible. And so in that time, they're starting to form a harem of cows, and the bulls will actually start defending their harem of cows against other competitive bulls. So they are, you know, strictly breeding those cows. So without getting too far into that end of things, pretty exciting time. And as a hunter that kind of grew up in that scene, anyways, it's when you're out in the forest and there's an elk bugling, you know, 20 feet away from you, it's a pretty hair-raising experience. They're pretty incredible. They're really loud, and they're big. They're really big animals, and you know, they get really aggressive when they get mad. They break all the branches around them. They stomp and make quite a mess of the ground around them. So a lot of respect for elk, and you know, as they progress through the mating season, they kind of slow down and form the big herds, which is different from their usual kind of sexual segregation that they have throughout the season. So mostly the mature bulls will be hanging out by themselves for the summer, you know, and then all the kind of maternity groups or the matriarchal groups will be hanging out with the cows and calves in different areas. So they split up for most of the year and then come together in breeding season, and then hang out in big herds for the winter. I'm sure as a kid, I really remember I played hockey as a kid, and I remember going to play hockey in Invermere and seeing the herds of elk between Golden and Invermere, and just there was hundreds of elk between here and Invermere. Now, you know, we're lucky to get these herds that are maybe 30 to 50 animals. So we're definitely, from my experience, we're just not seeing those same big herds in the winter. So that's a really good show for myself to of those populations, is that time of the year when you're seeing them in the big open wetlands and fields down south. So what do they like for habitat? So I tried to find a number because I like numbers. one elk will need around 200 hectares per year of grazing habitats. So I pulled that number out of a paper down in the States. So I'm thinking that's really looking at open habitats, grassy habitats. So there's a lot of feed availability in these habitats. So when you come up to more forested landscapes like around here, that area is going to grow a lot because we don't have that same level of productivity for elk forage in our forests. We have denser forests. We're not as dry as down south. So like I said before, summer in the mountains is traditionally what you think of with elk. They're up there in the alpine basins. They're in slide paths up high, and using that forage availability in the summer in places where they're not usually in the winter. This usually kind of creates a good scenario of carrying capacity on the landscape. So you can graze up there all summer and fall until those habitats are kind of depleted with grasses, and then you move down to your summer habitat and start grazing there, right? So the elk really feed a lot on grasses. They're grazers, kind of like a cow, I guess. And as they transition into winter, they're a little less picky about their diet and will, kind of eat whatever is palatable for them, chewing on bark and twigs and whatever is really around. Winter is really the restrictive season for elk because obviously there's a lot less food availability for them when they have to dig for it. So that being said, they're also very restrictive by snow depth because they are digging a lot for their food. So usually around 60 centimeters of snow tends to get a little bit quite restrictive for elk, and they'll transition more into the chewing on bark and twigs rather than digging for their preferred grasses and whatnot. So they need some connectivity between those habitats. So they need to be able to move from those summer habitats up high down to the habitats down low, and some availability of quality habitats between those winter and summer habitats is really important because it takes some time to get down and be selective of feeding throughout that process and avoid predators. So like I said before, some elk don't migrate. We'll get into that a little bit later. So this is kind of the golden habitats. This is actually Cirque Creek up top, up in the alpine basins. This is traditionally where you would see your elk for most of the summer. Up in these big alpine basins that are just grassy and full of good forage for them. And then as winter progresses, you see them moving into these big wetlands and marshes that support a lot of sedges and important foods for elk. So I'm going to kind of transition from talking about the kind of what makes an elk thing to some of the impacts that we see for elk, and I guess what's really in the literature, I guess, for impacts on elk. Displacement from habitats is a big thing, and that's really where we have competing habitat uses that are kind of forcing the elk out of their preferred habitats. This can be where you have some recreation activities happening, and dogs are chasing elk. They'll tolerate it a little bit, and then once it becomes a bit of an issue, they start to move on. Especially in the winter, it becomes a very important part of all ungulates, for that matter, in the winter, to keep fat on their body, to have their energy reserves. So when you start introducing what they perceive as a predator to their regular daily life, when they're getting chased, they're depleting their energy reserves, they're depleting their fat reserves, which may not directly be a cause of death, but it can result in aborting pregnancies and eventually create a scenario where they starve. They wither down to a whole lot of nothing. So a lot of the time, what will happen is they are getting a lot of those influences and disturbance, they'll just move on to other habitats. The cumulative effects on the landscape, I have this map up from one of my projects I'll talk about later, that this is looking at cross-valley migration corridors between Golden and Donald, really. So I took this layer and overlaid the different land uses. So there's private land ownership, there's forestry tenures, there's mining tenures, and different recreation tenures. So the cool blue colors are where there's only like one designated land use, and as you start to get to the warmer colors, there's multiple land uses to up to 9 different designated land uses on some parts of these habitats. I can see you want to ask questions. Anyways, so what happens is, as these cumulative effects happen on the landscape, there's a reduction of secure habitats. So like the dogs chasing elk scenario, our land use accumulates on the landscape and eventually pushes out the animals that are traditionally dependent on those landscapes. And one of the biggest things that is consistently cited in all of the elk literature around impacts to habitat is road use. Road use and trails are big on the impacts for elk. One guy in particular, Michael Wisdom, that's the words of wisdom. Got to try and be smart and witty every once in a while, right? These are some of the highlights that I took out of, well, I actually just copied and pasted them out of his report there. So, elk avoid recreationalists and trails in public areas. They try and stay hidden when they know that there's regular activities around there. Avoidance is the strongest around all-terrain vehicles, followed by mountain biking. So these are the faster-paced activities. And also a note that hiking and horseback riding, which are, I would say, the slower-paced activities, have less of a flea response, is what it really says in his reports. So it's there. And that's the end of it. So this graphic really kind of drives home that those impacts of ATV, the lighter blue colors are the flight distances. So like when you come across a herd of elk, that's how far they're going to potentially be running to get away from your activities. And in general, where elk are trying to just survive in and around activities, the darker blue is what they're trying to maintain for distance between known activities that are probably happening more frequently and secure habitats. So what this really kind of drives home to me is when you're looking at you know, areas like the West Bench that you know, you have roads stacked on top of each other at different elevations, and then trails that integrate in between those roads, that there's not a lot of habitat left, is there? So, yeah, that's obviously a little bit of the extreme case, but moving forward to this same, these are all roads and trails that are of that same analysis polygon that I had for my project. And there's some pretty serious areas in there for road densities. So imagine with these kind of flight distances and the increases of use of some of these roads, some of these roads aren't active. I'm going to say that right away. But these are what are on the provincial database for roads within these landscape units. So, you know, especially in this Donald area, a lot of these roads are getting used for, reopened for different recreational purposes. People are cutting them open to get in there on their ATVs, or building bike trails on them, or finding other, you know, trying to develop cross-country ski trails on them, or whatever, you know, like there's many different uses that tend to follow after resource road development. So, yeah. Habitat degradation is, I think, probably one of the biggest ones that regionally is impacting elk specifically. So that's, you know, really the habitats no longer support the values or the attributes that elk like. Elk really like open habitats. They want to be able to see the predators coming, and grass really likes to grow in open habitats. So we see this a lot. Like this photo here is the prime example of habitat degradation in our, you know, south of here, where we have dry forests that are traditionally have evolved with fire as a part of the ecosystem. Now we exclude fire from that ecosystem, and we start getting trees between the trees, and after decades of excluding fire from that ecosystem, we get this scenario where the grass is no longer growing in those understories, and you can't see wolves coming through that forest whatsoever. So it really loses its value for elk. Invasive species are another notable mention, I guess. So, you know, where we have roads and people going into wild areas, at times, you know, you can get, say, burdock stuck to you and bring that out into the forest and drop it somewhere else, and then all of a sudden you have an infestation of burdock in the middle of a wild area. And that slowly starts to build and infest, gets in the animal's fur, and continues to get spread across the landscape. A lot of those invasive or noxious species end up outcompeting the native species, and again, you're in a situation where there's less food available for your grazing species. And more down south, where you have more tenured rangelands, overgrazing is a big issue. It's so on these tenured rangelands, people have the tenure to be able to run their cattle out on crown land, and you know, there's very little enforcement or regulatory actions around how that is managed. You're supposed to pull your animals off those grazing leases to allow for elk to move, or other grazing ungulates to have food for the winter. But I've seen some reports where that's just simply not happening. yeah, human behavior is also contributes to that degradation of habitats. Grasslands, again, down south, you see a lot of these grassland areas where off-road vehicles are being kind of used wherever and whenever. It's getting into these open grassy fields and slowly reducing the availability of grasses and the ability for grasses to even grow in some of these places. So, it's getting depressing, isn't it? Habitat loss. So habitats are no longer available in some of these places. This picture is looking from the north side of the Kinbasket Reservoir, looking south towards Bush Harbor. So this is massive habitat loss for species like elk and moose and so many others. But I mean, it's not only on that big scale we see habitat loss. You know, we see a lot of prime winter range habitat because we love, as humans, love settlement in winter range habitats. It's the warmest, it's the driest, it's the best habitat for us as well. So yeah, we build our houses in you know, that winter habitat. So fragmentation is another big one. So this is one of the highway overpasses in the Kicking Horse Canyon here. This one is the closest one to the Yoho Park boundary. It's a pretty narrow path for elk to travel across to be able to connect their habitats from one side of the valley to another when that whole corridor is fenced off. So what happens with these kind of big projects that put up fences across big chunks of landscape is you lose connectivity between the smaller populations of elk. So say you have one population that's up on this side and one population that's up on that side. Traditionally, in the breeding seasons, they all come down into the middle of the valley and interact. So you get genetic exchange, you get population exchange. So you know, some of the herd that was over there for 1 year ends up going over there for that year. So you get a little bit of intermixing with the animals. So with fragmentation, you end up getting genetic diversity loss, and eventually, which leads to in some cases where you're really isolating populations, you get population decline. So yeah, highways and other roads are the big contributors to fragmentation, as well as some of the other developments I talked about before there. Okay, so and then there's direct loss. I mean, this is sorry. Yeah, building roads, any lineal corridors, trails, whatever. They all promote the ability for predators to move across the landscape a lot easier. And this, you know, in the winter we see this quite regularly being a problem, and you know, especially with species like caribou. So you have animals that put themselves in isolated areas to be away from predators from the winter, and then our, you know, snowmobiles, skin tracks, and all our different other recreational activities essentially pave a road right to where these animals are hanging out, making it extremely easy for predators to follow your tracks and get right into where those animals are traditionally been you know, in a refuge, I guess, from predators. Yeah, there's obviously natural cycles for predator and prey. As populations of elk go up, the populations of their predators tend to follow, and there's natural cycles in that. Management of hunting seasons is it's an important part of the impacts on populations and the amount of acceptable direct loss of elk. I think anybody that has driven south in the last few years during the reroutes has probably seen the carnage that had happened through the Kicking Horse Canyon reroutes. That was a big loss to a lot of our ungulates. Not only were these happening and affecting our kind of resident populations, but a lot of those reroutes happened at times where elk and some of the other seasonal migrants were moving through. So it's not just a localized impact that happened in those reroutes. It was really impacted the regional populations of many of our ungulate species. And of course there is train collisions that happen too, but I won't dig into that one. So, Brian, come on. I see elk all the time in Banff and Jasper. This is a common phenomena, I guess, around populations of elk, deer, whatever that come to evolve with a non-fatal relationship with humans. And they also slowly start to see that the predators don't like hanging around humans. So it's the human shield effect, I guess, is what it is. So it's like, okay, great. If the elk hang out around us, they're good and safe, and well, maybe it's not such a bad thing if they're good and safe. But what happens over time is you concentrate all your animals in one area that, I mean, we're also competing for those same habitats. And eventually those ecosystems start to degrade, and you start losing your carrying capacity. Has anybody seen that video where they've reintroduced elk or wolves into Yellowstone? This is the prime example of that, where, you know, the elk were basically eroding stream banks, grazing all the grasses and all the browse species down, which ended up reducing the availability of nesting habitats for birds, feed for other animals like beavers, equipment for the beavers to build their dams, etc., etc. So eventually it starts to degrade the habitats of everything else when you have a high concentration of a big animal like elk on the landscape. So eventually they surpass their carrying capacity, and you start to get disease and other things affecting herds. And now, more than ever, now that we have chronic wasting disease in the region, this becomes a very scary thing to have congregated populations of animals like elk in one area. So what we do see now is a lot of migratory behaviors reducing. So it's a really good study in the South Trench a bunch of years ago that really looked at this from years of data that really pinned down that, you know, elk used to migrate a lot, and now they're hardly migrating. So I'm getting the hustle here. So I'm going to skip through some of this, but. I can keep rattling on about this for days. It's a passion project, right? So you know what I've really tried to highlight in here is that elk avoid roads, and that has an impact on their ability to migrate. Forest ingrowth is a major cause of habitat degradation, and also kind of contributes to that loss of migratory habitats. Wildfire is a big part of what maintained habitats for elk in the past, and we're losing that and don't really have it in our ecosystems anymore. And really, you know, migratory behaviors are decreasing in a lot of species worldwide. So, status of elk in the North Trench. I'm going to try really hard to get through these, gentlemen, in the next few minutes. But so this that area in the green is what is defined by the province as the South Trench. This is the elk. The Kootenay Region Elk Stewardship Plan came out as a draft last year, and this is the table that came out in that document. So this is what the province, the managers of our elk know about our elk here. So healthy elk up here. Is the population resilient and self-sustaining over the long term? No. So we really don't know anything about the sustainability and long-term health of elk in this part of the world. So we don't really know what. Well, we do know, but we don't have that in the literature. What habitats are primarily targeted for winter range for elk? Are herds migratory up here, or are they non-migratory? We don't really have good numbers on our herd dynamics, like age classes and that distribution across the herds. How these different little mini herds across the area interact. And you know, the impacts of recreation. We don't really have that well documented, but we keep progressing with all these developments. So this is actually my dad, the year I was born. I had to put this in here because I just had to show off how he could grow a mustache. So what's happening up here? Right now, the province is actually in the process of putting forward some regulations around winter range. And there's some land conservation groups that are looking at acquisition of habitats in some areas. This is a project I'm working on right now for the Rod and Gun Club. That's getting a little bit of a plug for all my sponsors here. This was 112 hectares that was previously treated, and our goals in there are to improve forage production, like I said before, to thin out these forests, to promote the grass growth and allow for predator detection. So this is it was treated in 1985 by the club. So I found this picture just 2 days ago, which was really great, and I took this picture yesterday. So you can see those habitats are nice and open in there after treatment, and here it's green, it's forest. So really impacts the ability for elk to use those habitats. And in response to a lot of the unknowns of the elk stewardship plan, I've been working. I did some poking and prodding, and I'm working with the province actually right now to develop a collaring project. We're looking at putting out 30 collars in this area to really help get an idea of what elk are doing, where they're moving, and you know, try and narrow down those gaps of data that I mentioned before. The Kootenay Conservation Program through the Kootenay Connect group and Columbia Wetlands Stewardship Partners. I've been working on this project for a number of years now, looking at cross-valley migratory corridors, not only for elk, but all the other kind of large raping species that we have around here, grizzly bears, wolverines, and all these other pretty cool animals. So yeah, and just trying to connect wild spaces to wild spaces. I'm almost there. 1 minute. And I've worked on some of the corridor project work. It ends up feeding into some of our access management proposals. So Golden, here's Golden. across our region, these are all the areas that have access management for elk habitats. We really don't have much of anything up in this part of the world, so we're looking at some pretty key migratory habitats and seasonal habitats to try and reduce the ability to use roads essentially through not only hunting seasons but other recreational uses. So, I mean, that's it. Kind of cumulative impacts. Reduce habitat quality and availability for elk. Elk need space. Elk need fire. I would say that forestry does a pretty okay job of producing some of those early cereal stands that elk like. They open up big pieces of land and let the grasses grow. Elk avoid roads. We have little scientific information up here, and really what I'd like to stress is winter recreation activities should not be happening on key ungulate winter range. It's the wrong time of the year to be chasing animals around. What can we do? Support access management in important areas. I can't stress enough how much it's in everything that you read that roads displace elk. So keep your dog on a leash. I think that's an important one. Be aware of your own impact too. You know, like it's when you see elk out there and they're running away from you, you got an impact. Even if you don't see them, you know, be aware. Land use planning is a really important thing. As one of my first slides, I'm out there as much as anybody else doing all these things, but there's places to do it and there's places to not do it. So, support our collaring project. I'll be passing around a hat later for donations. Yes, I'm a hunter and I fish, so I say support. Buy a hunting and fishing license, because a lot of that money from hunting and fishing goes to the Habitat Conservation Trust Foundation, which helps support projects like our habitat project out in east of town here. And be an advocate for wildlife and wild spaces. It helps to have other voices out there. Obviously, I'm a little bit passionate about it, and it helps to have friends in that in that realm. So, yeah, that's that.